soon met a neighbor by the name of William Armstrong, who worked in a turpentine factory. And although the two were never married, they had 2 children, Louis, and 2 years later, his sister Beatrice. This was the heart of the New Orleans Black Vice District, and would be Armstrong's home until he left New Orleans at the age of 21. Necessity made Armstrong work hard. From the age of 7, he earned his keep with a succession of menial jobs, scavenging discarded produce, working on junk wagons, unloading banana boats, washing dishes, and selling newspapers. The best of these jobs, delivering coal, brought him to the Karnofsky family, which was a recent Jewish immigrant family, and their kindness he long remembered. The Karnofskys taught him Russian lullabies and helped him to acquire his first cornet. After Louis' death, they found among his papers a 75-page eulogy of his admiration for the Karnofsky family. Armstrong was a prolific diarist, and the volumes that he wrote well tell his story. He later in life carried a reel-to-reel tape wherever he went. If he'd have guests in his home, the first thing he would do was to turn on the reel-to-reel tape. Armstrong was married 4 times. His last wife was Lucille Wilson, a dancer. Very tender pose here for you. And this marriage was the last. They purchased a home in the boroughs of Queens and New York City, and there they lived for the last 30 years of Louis' life. At the time of his death, he had recorded 650 reels of conversation and music and had 5,000 photographs. He made collages all over his tape boxes, his record player, and even on his ceiling. Here you see him on top of a ladder pasting some photographs on his ceiling of his home. At a young age, Armstrong had many altercations with street fighting, and at the age of 12 he was arrested for firing a gun on New Year's Eve in the street. But it was his good fortune that he was sent to the Colored Waifs Home, which is a well-run home, and they had strict discipline instilled there, and it was there that under the tutelage of a musician by the name of Peter Davis that he received his first musical training. When he was released from the school at 13, he encountered the rich musical tradition of the city. He wrote in later life, "Jazz and I grew up side by side." He played in all the venues linked with the birth of jazz. With his growing reputation, he was invited to Chicago in 1922, which I've already mentioned a minute ago, and to play with Oliver's band. After that, he went to New York. He played with Jefferson Henderson a while, and then he started his own group. I don't know just what 13 is here, Bob. Oh yeah, just a picture of Louis. This is a picture of when he toured England at one time. He started a small group, and he called them the Red Onion Jazz Babies. This is in 1924 when this recording was made. He got the Red Onions because that was the name of a restaurant in New Orleans that he liked very much, so he just called it that. On this particular record, Sidney Beckett is playing. I mentioned Sidney Beckett a while ago, and the dapper fella in the picture was Kid Ory. The name of this is called Cakewalkin' Babies from Home. Red Onion Jazz Babies, 1924, New York City. This is a picture of his Red Hot Five. This is Johnny Dodds, Louis Armstrong, Johnny St. Cyr, Kid Ory, and Lil Hardin. I might mention he was married 4 times. In his memoirs, Louis doesn't even tell his first wife's name, but it's funny to read it. It didn't last very long. The words that he used to describe her, I certainly would not use here to mix crowd tonight. But if you want the joy of reading what he said about his first wife, by all means, get a copy of his memoirs. His second wife was Lil Armstrong. Lil Hardin she was. She was a refined woman. She had a lot of influence on Louis Armstrong. She was a graduate of Fisk University, valedictorian of her class, and she met him in the Oliver's Band in Chicago. His third wife was Alton Smith, who was a dancer, and his last wife was Lucille that you saw a minute ago. The next picture. This is a picture of Louis Armstrong just 3 weeks before his death. When the 69-year-old Louis Armstrong died on July the 6th, 1971, it was front page news throughout the world. More than 25,000 mourners filed by his coffin, which lay in state at the New York City National Guard Armory. His widow, Lucille, received the condolences of political leaders, entertainers, and fans from around the world. I am thankful recordings for Armstrong continues to perform with freshness and vitality that reaffirms the stature of one of the most inspiring and influential people of his time. I think at this time, I'm going to go ahead. I've got one more piece here by Louis Armstrong. It's one that's identified with him, and it's the Hot Five that you saw a minute ago. And it's called The Big Butter and Egg Man. You may have heard of it. With lights, yeah. David's a good teacher, here. He got me going here pretty good. Okay. This is Big Butter and Egg Man, and I'm going to just touch. I've got so much more to say, and it didn't run this long at home. I know I've got wordy here tonight, and I didn't intend to. I've got to watch out in the second hour. When it comes 9 o'clock, I'm just going to play them quick. So why don't you go have stretch your legs and have refreshments, and I'll play the butter thing and get it out of the way. I might even just let it go and play Duke Ellington, and I'll explain very little about him. Go ahead with your refreshments. I had about 3 pages here on Ellington, but I'm going to skip some of it. I'm just going to say that Ellington knew a lot about music, and he never quit learning. He was born in Washington, D.C. in 1899. He took piano lessons as a child, and his first piece of music was called the Soda Fountain Rag at the age of 16. His veteran collaborator, I don't know if you've ever heard of Billy Strayhorn or not, but he did most of his arranging and composing. He said of Ellington, Ellington plays the piano, but his real instrument is the band. I was going to play these others for you. I played them during the break to save time. But the A Train, you begin to hear the screaming trumpets and the rich chords that come out. Ellington, in 1966, he traveled to Senegal and was awarded Emperor Star by Haile Selassie, and Ethiopia, and one of the honors that he received. I've already played you this one. Ellington wrote thousands of pieces, ranging from standards such as Don't Get Around Anymore to such sophisticated numbers as Mood Indigo. He composed full-scale suites such as Black, Beige, and Brown, which was a musical history of the black race. He also wrote one called Such Sweet Thunder. It was a sequence of pieces based on Shakespearean characters. And one called The Royal Ancestry, which was a tribute to Ella Fitzgerald. I have so many recordings of Ellington, I didn't know quite what to play tonight, but I did play the one associated with him while we were on break, Take the A Train, and then this one that I just saved a little bit on the end. This is Ellington on the piano, and I chose this as a Single Petal of a Rose. He wrote it for the Queen of England, and only one record was pressed, and she has that copy in her possession. So this is just the end of A Single Petal of a Rose. There's two of my favorites. One is called the Creole Blues, which is a trombone to the wah, 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 beautiful thing. But I like this one too. This is just the ending of it. This is Ellington playing, no instruments, just piano. Okay, next one, Bob. This brings us into the phonographs. That's as far as I'll go. I will say, though, I don't know if I can remember some of those names. After Louis Armstrong and King Oliver, they started a new school. They called it the Chicago School of Jazz. These young musicians were hearing Oliver and Armstrong. Some of them, if I can remember, Gene Krupa, who I think for a while went here to St. Joe. I never have been able to find out if he graduated here or not. I brushed shoulders with Gene Krupa back in, about 1942, and it thrilled me to death. I just seen him in the Circle Theater in Indianapolis, and we walked out on the street, and here he came around the corner. I wish I'd asked him for his autograph now, but it's too late. Gene Krupa, Eddie Condon, which was born over here in Goodland, went to Moments, then into Chicago and into New York, ran a nightclub there for a long while. Bix Beiderbecke, the trumpet player from Iowa, Davenport, Iowa. Well, I can't think. There were about 7 of them that were called in that Chicago School of Jazz. Now then, we're going to go real quick here. I'm going to skip some of this, so bear with me. This is an original, this is a sketch of the early phonograph that Edison himself made. He invented it in 1877. It was a real crude instrument. I think I can explain on the next slide pretty much. This is what the Edison machine looked like. Of course, you had to crank it up. Now, the first machines had no governor on the spring-wound motor. And as it ran down, so did the music ran down also. But later on, they put a governor on it, and then it would run okay, but when the spring ran down, that was all. They had a switch here to turn it on, and then they had a screw assembly that that the stylus would follow down as it turned. Also, they had a knob that they could turn to make it go faster or slower. But this was an ugly thing, sticking up in the air like this, so this still had a horn on it, but they enclosed it in a cabinet, and it made a prettier piece of furniture. Okay, the next one. In 1900, it was a status symbol to have a phonograph and a piano in every parlor. There were some 50 companies making phonograph records in that day. The main 3 were Victor, Columbia, and Edison. And here you see these machines were not only a record player, but they were a recorder. You could record it and play it right back. So recorders are not new. Here's the lady playing, and probably they're singing in the Sweet By and By or something like that. Anyway, Edison stayed with the cylinders right up to 1913, even though the disc was becoming quite popular. So he began in 1913 to transferring some of his recordings on disc on cylinders over to disc, but he kept on making cylinders right up to 1929 when he got out of the business altogether. I used to have some Edison records, but they got away from me somewhere. They must have been a good 1/4 to a 1/2 inch thick. Anyway, he must have had a crystal ball, because he got out of the business just 12 days before Wall Street made that terrible breakdown. The man that invented the disc, the flat disc, was Irving Berlin. He had come to the United States. He was born in Hanover, Germany, and he introduced the flat disc in 1887. I should have said a minute ago on the cylinders that Edison used. It was a system that they call Hill and Dales. The stylus that cut the record moved up and down, making shallow and not so shallow engravings. And then when you played it back, where the needle would go up and down. Now, Emil Berliner, however, had what he called the lateral, where the needle moved back and forth sideways. In this day and age, there were thousands and thousands of patents. It was said of Edison that he invented the 20th century, and he patented it. So, as a result, there were constant lawsuits tied up in court. For instance, there was a man that ran one company, Eldridge Johnson, that sued Berliner because he was infringing on their rights as using a disc when Berliner had invented it in the first place. But this company beat him severely in the court, and Eldridge Johnson was so pleased that he renamed his company Victor for his victory over Berliner. I think I'm going to show you, I have records at home spilling everywhere, and I've often thought I was going to get rid of them. But I've never had the courage because they're a part of my life. Back in the 1930s and 40s, I would save up my money and buy albums, and then I would sketch in the front of them. I don't think I'll show you that one. I don't think it'll show up very good. But this one is dated 1941. If you can show that, Bob, I don't know. So if I threw this away...
Show it sideways.
Okay, there, that's the new way of doing it, sideways. Well, it doesn't matter. So that when I go through my albums to see this, I think I'm going to leave it to my children to get rid of all this stuff someday. This is an old Victor record. Well, you can't see it very good. This is John McCormick singing Sweet Genevieve. You want to turn it over, Bob? In the early days, you really got gypped because on the other side, it's blank. I have one record here, Blue in the Blues. Now, this is a record that was made in Richmond, Indiana. It's an old Gennett record, and collectors would kill for Gennett records anymore. I'll talk about the Gennett studios in a little while. I'm going to skip some of this here because I want to get to some of the more here. When you go to a live performance, it lasts for only as long as you're there hearing it. But if you take good care of a record, they'll last a lifetime and longer. I should have brought one of my 33 1/3. I used to say when I was teaching school, I would bend the album so that the record album would spread open, and then I'd slide the record in so that the cardboard would never touch the grooves. I told my students, if you ever catch me touching the records with my fingers or letting it scrape on either side, I'll give you $5. Well, you know they watch me like hawks, but I never had to pay the $5 one time. I might tell you, I owe a lot to recordings. I've got 3 incidents in my young days that affected my love of music. One of them was when I was about 11 years old. I'd go visit my uncle, my mother's brother. He lived in Windfall, Indiana. Does anybody here know where Windfall, Indiana is? And he had, I don't have one of these in my collection, but he had a whole bunch of Bluebird records. They were the most beautiful centered disc. I've got some Bluebird records at home, but they're just an old blue. This beautiful bird is on this record. I wish I had some of those now. And I'd crank up his portable machine and I'd listen for hours. Another one, a short distance from us, there was a fellow by the name of Lonnie Coy, who fancied himself as an opera singer. He would let me come over, and while he was out in the garden or something, he turned his living room over to me. He had a big console, but it was still the wind-up kind, and I would listen to these opera records. While he considered himself an operatic singer, he did have a beautiful voice, but it was an Irish. I don't care if he was singing Tannhäuser or a church hymn, it was still an Irish tenor. Beautiful, understand. I've got nothing against Irish tenors, but they wouldn't sing La Traviata too well. And then the last one, when I was 16, I got a job driving for he was an insurance salesman. Now, he had some kind of a debilitating disease, and he walked sort of on the balls of his feet, and he looked as though he was going to pitch forward all the time, and he had a severe palsy condition. Wonderful fella. Well, I would drive him around to call on his clients. So he would invite me over to his home, and whereas Lonnie Coy had a wonderful collection of records, Paul Richmond was his name, had a super collection of records. His wife worked at the library at night on the desk, and she would set out refreshments for us, and I would go over. And he'd usually start out the evening by saying, "Well, Hal, what do you want to hear this evening?" Or he said, "Let's hear so-and-so." Well, I did all the cranking and all the putting the records on. Even though he had a beautiful voice before he was ill, and he still had it afterwards. Sometimes he'd break out in singing. But these hours instilled in me the love of good music, and my enjoyment of jazz and country music followed over the years and extended my pleasure of listening to different types of music. Record companies in this day, like I said, they were going in so many directions. Some were recording on the Hill and Dale or the Lateral. They were recording on speeds all the way from 40 RPMs to 100 RPMs. They had so many different methods of recording that you couldn't play one record from one company on the machine put out by the other company. Also, they were working more on material that was more durable, the shellacs, and on needles that those old steel needles played havoc on the old records. That's why most of them scratch now so bad. Thomas Edison, I don't have these in my notes, however, did invent what he called a stylus, a diamond head stylus, which was a big improvement on the old steel head. And this is one reason I think Edison got out of the business, because he wanted everything to be perfect. While some companies were putting their what do you call them? The original that they pressed from on some material, he was putting them on gold because he thought that they would make better sound. Well, at this point, I would like to mention Gennett Record Company. I'll take this off of here. We'll get to Gennett here in just a minute. Okay. Which was in Richmond, Indiana, and it was the most unlikely place, smack dab in the middle of America, for a record company. But Richmond at that time was linked to the Ohio River by the Whitewater Canal and the Whitewater River, and it also utilized the power, and it had a lot of industry there. Cotton and woolen mills, paper mills, tanneries, foundries, manufacture of farm equipment and carriages, and last but not least, lots of breweries. At that time, there was an Alsatian piano maker by the name of George Trazer, and he had produced pianos on a small scale in Ripley, Ohio, and in Hamilton, Ohio. But he needed funds to increase his business, and in Richmond, he found them in three men. Richard Jackson, James Starr, and Henry Gennett. Now, there was a long road of merging here, but by 1903, Henry Gennett gained complete control of the Starr Piano Factory along with his three sons. Well, it's difficult to read this white. I might mention just in passing too, Gennett had a brother-in-law that he was in business with a while. His name was Jesse French from St. Louis. Jesse French also made a fine piano, and he later made them in Newcastle, Indiana. In 1934, my sister was working as a bookkeeper in the J.C. Penney Company store for $14 a week. And she bought me a brand new piano. It's the most travel piano. It went from Tipton, from Kokomo to Tipton, from Tipton to Frankfurt, from Frankfurt to Rensselaer, from Rensselaer back to Lafayette, back to Rensselaer to Houston, and now I have it back here in Rensselaer. Now, it's got a lot of nicks. It was painted once, then Marcia stripped it down to its natural finish, but it's still a good piano, still a good piano after all those years, and like my records, couldn't bear to part with it. It's like one of the family. I enjoy playing it as much as I do my Baldwin. Back in those days, like I said, there were 250 piano companies. I expect you'd be lucky now to have a dozen piano companies. I think what did it was recordings and television and radio. Jennett was not a musician by any means. He was an entrepreneur. He was a businessman. One story that they told of him, his chauffeur was driving to work one day and in his 12-cylinder Packard, and they had to stop behind a wagon load of wool. He instructed his chauffeur to take him to the nearest piano store that he could find. He rushed in and told the salesman, "Get down there to the dock. There's a man selling wool. He's going to have money pretty soon. Sell him a piano." Under his guidance and development, the sprawling, okay, we could do the next one now. The sprawling factory complex of 35 acres was known as Star Valley, Banjo Valley when they began to record, and Harmony Hollow. Star by 1915 was one of the finest piano companies in the United States, and recording was getting more prevalent and prosperous. So they already had a network of distribution in the whole United States. They had a woodworking and a metal fabrication within this 35-acre plant. So they got into the business, and as they thought, Victor Records sued them in 1919 for infringements on the patent, and this was held in the federal courts in southern New York. It's almost like the story in the Bible of David and Goliath, mighty victor against little Star. But you know, after 2 years of battle, Star soundly defeated mighty Victor, and then they began putting out their records. Jennett Recording Studios was very primitive. It was 100 feet long and 35 feet wide. In those days, they had no microphones. They had do you know what I'm talking about? If I say one of those megaphones like cheerleaders used to use, I don't know if they do that anymore or not, but you played into the big end, and they had a thin membrane that when the sound came in, it would wave and cause the stylus on the record. Now, the band members would be in one room, and then this huge horn would go through the wall. Now they experimented a lot with different size horns, and it sounded pretty bad, as you heard some of them here. The trumpet player, for instance, they made him stand way back in the corner away because it would make the record the needle jump on the tape or on the disc. Voices weren't too bad. Violins sounded terrible. If you've ever heard an old Caruso record, he sounds pretty good, but it doesn't sound like a decent orchestra, and you know that he had the best. Drums, they prohibited drums in a lot of studios because, again, when they just limited them to wood blocks because that didn't make the needle skip. This, in order to keep the shellac record soft, they had to record in 85 to 90 degrees summer and winter. So you can imagine some of these band leaders that as they came out of the studio, they were probably wringing wet. But in those years, they recorded such peoples as William Jennings Bryan. They did Ku Klux Klan parodies on old hymns, King Oliver's Creole Band, Louis Armstrong, Bix Beiderbecke's Wolverines, Duke Ellington was there, Gene Autry, Jelly Roll Morton, Carmichael, Guy Lombardo, and you ever hear of Bradley Kincaid, the WLS Barn Dance star? That's probably before your time, I expect. But up until the 1920s, It was a lot, the whole thing finally folded up in 1952. There were a number of reasons that it did. This factory was torn down, and literally collectors from around the world carried it away brick by brick. There was one man that came as far as Great Britain and wanted a window pane out of it. So assuming, perhaps somewhere in Great Britain, there's a window pane from this. The entire factory is gone now. I think the Jennett dynasty finally began making ice boxes and stoves in the California division, but the division out on Long Island closed altogether. The only thing that left of the Jennett clan is their mansion, which is still in Richmond, and it's on the national records. It was after the Jennetts died, it was made into apartments, and it practically fell apart. But it's been restored now to its old beauty, the ballroom, the whole works. So this is all that's left of the Jennetts. Now, what I would like to do now, if I can work this light, get the lights back on here. B lights, 100% level. There, we got it. Okay, I'm going to show you how they got records, music put on records. Al, would you come up here? I woke Al up. He jumped, almost fell out of his chair. Would you sit down over there, Al? I take Al because he's a good friend and he's game for anything. Do you know who you are? You're Irving Mills. You're the most successful music publishers in New York City. Do you know who I am? I'm a song plugger. I'm a lot like George Gershwin. George Gershwin started out plugging songs. You know, in New York City there were hundreds, maybe thousands of songwriters. Now Irving here couldn't possibly let all those people in, but he had song pluggers out looking for these songs. And listen, just today I got a good song. Would you like to take a listen to this and see if you might put this on print it out?
Certainly.
Okay, now this is kind of a love song. Don't anybody go out and try to buy this because it really flopped. He lost his money in this deal. But he doesn't care though, because he published Stardust too, and he made a barrel there. Still is. Okay, the name of this is, I think I know the words, but I've got them in front of me because my memory's not always too good. This song came out in about 1924, and it's called Who Loves You? Now, don't you think that sounds like a nice name?
Very nice.
Okay. See what you think about this. Who loves you? Ask yourself the question. Who loves you, sweetheart? And tell me who thinks of you 1,000 times a day. Who's blue and lonely, honey, when you're away? Who needs you every minute? Who fell for you from the start? Oh, who just longs for your caresses? You don't have to take 3 guesses. Who loves you, sweetheart? Now, what'd you think of that? Will you buy it?
Very good.
You'll buy it, will you?
Sure.
Now, you see, that makes me happy because I get my commission, whatever it might be, and the guy that wrote it gets a commission. Now, you know what the next thing he's going to have to do is print it up. Now, a lot of these music publishers had contracts with orchestras. Now, the first thing here Irving did was to call his orchestra, and he says, I want you to put that on tape on record, because I've got to sell a lot of these copies. So they got together in a recording studio, and away they went. This would be a good one to dance to, wouldn't it? what makes one song go and one song not go? What makes one song go big and the other one flops? This one flops. Irving also hired a pretty girl. I'll let you hear the lyrics once more, and she's going to sing it here.
Who loves you? Ask yourself the question. Who loves your sweetheart? And tell me.
So probably what Irving wound up with was a lot of records in his storehouse they finally had to get rid of, and a lot of paper. Of course, I don't think they recycled in that day, but if they did now, they would.
Who needs you every minute? Who fell for you from the start? Oh, who just longs for your caresses? You don't have to take three guesses. Who loves your sweetheart?
Okay, now, George Gershwin started out as a song plugger. I told you a minute ago why one song would go and one wouldn't. He wrote a song in 1924. Have you ever heard this one? I see what this pedal is. It makes it softer. Then in the middle it goes. Well, when that came out in 1924, it was a total flop. They only sold what? I can't remember. I think it was Warner Brothers that had that music. They only sold 875 copies in the whole United States. And does anybody recognize the song? The Man I... Yeah. Thank you. Well, my piano's not doing that badly, then, is it? But then they didn't quit there. They put it in, I think, about 3 different operettas until finally it caught on and they made their money. But they sure lost it to start with. Thank you, Al. Oh, wait a minute. I've got something for you for helping me out here. Here, there you are, Al. To show you that one song is good, one's not bad, Irving Berlin, between 1907 and 1939, wrote 180 songs. Had published 180 songs, and only 10 of them you ever hear now. Alexander's Ragtime Band, A Pretty Girl Is Like a Melody, Always, Blue Skies, Putting on the Ritz, How Deep is the Ocean, Easter Parade, I've Got My Love to Keep Me Warm, God Bless America, Let's Have Another Cup of Coffee. These were all by ABC Music Corporation. However, has anybody here ever heard Sadie Salome Go Home? Or Grizzly Bear? Or When the Midnight Choo-Choo Leaves from Alabama? Or Snooky Ookums? If you don't want me, why do you hang around? When you walked out, someone walked right in. You might have heard this one, though. I'll play one more. I'm not going to do it all. I want to go back, I want to go back, I want to go back to the farm, far away from harm, with a milk pail on my arm. I miss the rooster, the one that used to wake me up at 4 a.m. I think your great big city's very pretty. Nevertheless, I want to be there. I want to see there the certain someone full of charm. Oh, how I wish again that I was in Michigan down on the farm. Well, that was Irving Berlin. As for me, I'd be satisfied with writing just one song like White Christmas or God Bless America. I wouldn't have to worry about anything else. Okay, I'm going to play you, give you another, if I can get the overhead here, Billie Holiday there. This is the way record companies did. Hello there, Billie. This is Billie Holiday, and she's one of my, I suppose not heroes, heroines in music. I have a lot of recordings by Billie Holiday, and I told you a minute ago that, Al, these record companies, when they bought a record, they wanted to get them out just as soon as possible. Now, in this case of Columbia Records, this session I'm going to be talking about, Columbia Records had a contract with a fellow by the name of Teddy Wilson. I don't know if you've ever heard of Teddy Wilson or not, but he played with Benny Goodman later on in his famous trio. Oh boy, I'm really running long. Anyway, this was made in 1935. Billie Holiday couldn't read a single note of music, so Teddy Wilson had to teach her these numbers. They recorded 4 numbers in 3 hours, and they were at the mercy of the record company. Some of the material was bad. Now this particular one I'm about to play wasn't even issued. It was so bad that the company didn't issue it. However, until just a few years back, they issued every record that, of course they did it on CD, that Billie Holiday did. So this is a recording session in 1935. Probably these people hadn't seen the music till they walked into the studio that day. But Billie Holiday had a way of making a song her own, no matter how bad the material was. Most of these fellows had to be able to read music, because when they went in, they put these arrangements in front of them. That was it. Billie Holiday had kind of a tragic life. She got into drugs. Later on, she served some time in prison, and she died a fairly young lady, I think about 1954, I believe. I may have it there, I don't know. I'm only half done, and I'm going to skip all the rest of this, but I do want to mention one other thing. I want to play some Prohibition numbers, but I want to mention that in the United States now, I have a catalog here. I don't know how anybody makes a living. I expect there are 15,000 records here that are available, and this is not near all of them. I belong to a jazz club. It's a Jazz Heritage Club that puts out magazines every week. They have classical clubs, and this is not the only one. I think Columbia Records has one too. But besides the big studios, I want to mention as number 3 there are a lot of small recording studios. I read an article where there's one just 2 blocks from Wrigley Field in the basement of a house. Now, there is a store in New York City that sells only records from these small companies. I think he said that there are probably 50 companies he sells. And I'm going to leave you with all this jazz in your mind. I'm going to leave you with one of these records that I ran across. It was put out by a small studio in Red Barnes Record in St. Paul, Minnesota. I'd never heard of the fella before. It's Greg Brown is his name, and I think maybe I like it because I love the Midwest so much. I think I probably bought the record to start with because the little insert in the front was talking about this small town in Iowa that he lived. They'd go down to someone's ice cream parlor, and then they'd go on the courthouse steps, and they'd visit the evening, and just a typical small town. And what happens to a lot of these studios, however, the big companies, if they should have a hit singer or a hit band or something, a company will do one of two things, the big ones. They'll buy out the whole studio and disband it and keep the contracts, or they'll try to buy the contract just of the one person. So a lot of people wanting to get started in the record business will record on these small for these small recording companies. Now I'm going to play this to clear your mind. It's almost country music, which I like very much, but I like the sentiment in it about, they say something in here about taking care of your old and, you know, all this stuff. Okay. Greg Brown. Don't try to buy this record in the store, because you won't be able to. Some of these facts and skipping around. I appreciate it.